Say my name. I am awake. I am the danger. I am the one who knocks.
Welcome back to another episode, Breaking into Breaking Bad. Caleb, Clifford, Humphrey. Today we're discussing Season 2, Episode 12, Phoenix. So before we get going, Caleb, you want to give us a brief recap as to what happens in this episode?
Yeah, so if you remember how the last episode ended with Walt having to decide whether or not to go see the birth of his daughter or make this drug deal happen, we see what happens at the beginning of this with Walt rushing around to deliver the drugs, get the money, and make it to the hospital in time. He gets to see his daughter. Doesn't really sound like Skylar was too curious, other than, what just took you so long. Other than that, you see a lot of progression with Jane and Jesse's relationship, and it kind of gets into this progression where Jane finds out how wealthy Jesse is, and she kind of manipulates Jesse into getting Walt, basically blackmailing Walt to give Jesse his portion. And the main reason why Walt was holding on to his portion is because Walt knows that Jesse has been shooting up heroin and getting into drugs and just has not been himself lately. A lot of back and forth with that. And at the end of the episode, we see a tragic ending with Walt coming back to try to talk some more sense into Jesse. And when he walks into their house, he sees Jane on her. Actually, they were cuddling, and she falls back on her back, and she overdoses and dies there. And Walt makes the conscious decision not to intervene. And we'll get a lot of this. I mean, there's a lot to unpack here, but that was pretty much the main gist of the episode.
Okay. I'm going to take issue with the way you phrased how Jane turns over, because if I remember right, Walt tries to shake Jesse awake. And when he does that, he makes her fall over.
Right. That was the part that I was going to say unpacked. He was the main reason why she was no longer in that prone position with Jesse.
Right. Okay. Well, we'll get into that later, but we've got to unpack the title to this episode first. So this is called Phoenix. So some things that come to mind: Phoenix, Arizona. It's not that far away, but I don't think that's anything to do with this. I think if this likely has something to do with the bird, the legendary mythical creature known as the Phoenix, which famously rises from the ashes to live again as a new life. And when we contrast this title with the title of Over, we can kind of see an end to one phase and the beginning of a new one. And so with the episode titled Over, we see Walt, the reason for having to get into the meth business is gone. He gets a good prognosis for his cancer, and it might still kill him in the end, but he's bought himself a lot of time and it's in remission. What can we say was really over? Well, Heisenberg was kind of over. But what happens here in the Phoenix? Heisenberg rises again and lives on. So that's my take. Is that what you got? Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah, that's correct. That's
the correct answer. Yeah.
The revival of a lot of things. You see like their drug, their little gang of theirs is starting to come up again. You also see the birth of their new baby, Holly. So yeah,
right.
Yeah, you're right.
Okay, well then that's settled. So let's get into the episode. So yeah, this starts the intro, right? We're always kind of paying attention to the intro. Sometimes the intro is just a weird thing that doesn't really make any sense or really has no apparent connection to the episode. And other times it's just some high moving beginning to the episode. And here it's one of those. So we see Walt flying into the drop zone where he's supposed to deliver the meth. And he's desperately trying to find the exact location where he's supposed to meet. And we never see the drug deal go down. We don't ever see him get the money. I'm wondering, how does that happen, right? Does he give the money? Does he give the drugs over before he gets the money? Does he worry that he's not going to get his money? Because we remember how high, the high intensity it was with the drops with Tuco, right? It was kind of scary. He's got these guys and, you're not really sure. They could just shoot Walt right there and say, we'll take your drugs and that's it. We don't get that. Any thoughts on why they don't?
Yeah, well, Saul kind of painted the picture of this of Gus from Pollos Hermanos, his operation. He's been doing it for 20 years. He's never been caught, and he's above all suspicion, and he's very by the book and professional. And if you see him, he's a manager. He operates he operates 13 Pollos Hermanos. Like, this guy is not the type of Tuco at all. Yeah. And so I don't even think it crosses his mind. Now, obviously, the guy that interacted with Walt and said, hey, meet us at the exit and here, he seemed more rough and stuff. But I don't think it was something that kind of entered his mind. But you would think he would have some hesitations going to this meeting. But also, he was at a position where it's this is all they have. They just have the 38 pounds. If they don't make this work, they don't have any other options. This was their last option at all. So if this doesn't work, nothing worked. It was either this or nothing.
I hear what you're saying is that the only thing that really matters is that he went and took this option and made the deal. It doesn't really matter how it went down. And the director and the writer didn't think that we needed to know those issues, know those things.
He wasn't really thinking of any ramifications at this point, because I think of how well Saul kind of presented the scenario.
Well, and the other thing is Walt is desperate to get back to Albuquerque to get to the hospital.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And we learned that he completely missed the birth, and that was a big deal. Although I got to say, I missed the birth of my own daughter just a week ago because she just came that fast. I was still checking us into the hospital. Did I tell you this? Crazy.
Now, did Ted Beneke drive Gracie to the hospital as well, or?
Well, no. So I drove Gracie to the hospital. Yeah, that's true. Ted Beneke wasn't anywhere near my wife, and better not be Ted
That's
Beneke.
Good.
Yeah,
that's good. Yeah.
But so you're right. So it's not exactly the same thing, but just saying sometimes these things happen quickly. But we know that that's not the situation here. Walt was elsewhere. He's making up lies about traffic to try to
staring at brake lights on the 40.
That's it. Yep, brake lights. So so Ted's there in the hospital, and we don't know Ted's there right away, right? We're kind of seeing Walt's perspective. He goes in, he sees Skylar, sees the baby, and then you're like, oh, hi, Ted. Ted's here. Mm-hmm. And, you're thinking, okay, Ted's a good boss. He's taking care of his people.
Sure.
Anyone would have done what he did in that moment, right?
Right.
But my gosh, why does he have to go in for a kiss goodbye when they leave?
A kiss on the cheek? Yeah.
On the cheek. What? That's weird, right in front of Walt. That's just weird.
Bold move, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. And Walt doesn't seem to think anything of it either. So that also is a little odd.
True. He's probably got a lot on his mind, but yeah, other than just being surprised that Ted was just lurking in the back of the room,
Well, the image was definitely clear that Ted was in a kind of father figure position in that scene. Where he was there when Walt wasn't there. And that's really all there is to it. Okay, so then the next scene is with Jane and her father. And I really appreciate the way they build this relationship. They show so much by not showing much at all. We don't know the history. Where's her mother? We don't know.
Mm-hmm.
like, how did Jane get into drugs, and how long was she in it, and what was it like when she was building back a relationship with her father, and what chaos was there that had been resolved. And we get the sense that they had a weekly, maybe twice weekly, something, regular recovery meeting that they're going to together. And it's understood that she never misses, that this is a regular thing.
Right. Been doing it for 18 months also.
Right.
So, at least 18 months.
At least 18 months. Yeah. And when she's late the first time because she's been hanging out with Jesse and sleeping in, the lie that she gives is that she's been working on a tattoo. And it's a really complicated one, I guess. And the guy keeps changing his mind. And her dad says, you need to avoid people like that. And he's referring to people like you would find in the tattoo parlor, right? And she says something like, yeah, I know, Dad. And we're thinking, wait, but Jesse is the tattoo parlor kind of guy, right? Like she's
right. At that point, she's just being agreeable, just to kind of get him to to continue the conversation.
But she's already started to wrap herself up and twist herself up in lies with her father. And those are just going to kind of build up and build up and build up.
Yep. The one thing I noticed about this episode, more than I'd probably say more than any other episode so far, is that there was a ton of foreshadowing in this episode.
Yeah.
And it starts off with the first meeting that Jane and her dad go to. And I don't know if you heard the one guy talking about this 1 year anniversary, and he's been tempted to do a lot of things. And he says a line, it says, all it would take is one friend and I'd be out there ripping and running, and it shows Jane just flipping her 18-month coin over and over and over. I don't know if she was considering like, oh man, like I'm high right now. And also, oh, that's my one friend, Jesse, like this is a scenario that was definitely a foreshadow of what's going on. So I like it.
Yeah. You start to feel bad for the whole situation.
Oh yeah.
Early on. And you do feel really strongly, at least I did, for her father, who's clearly suffered a lot and is 100% committed to helping his daughter and doing everything he can. And we'll come back to that in a little bit here. But
he says he's been dealing with it for 10 years. So like him and Jane have been struggling along, and he just says you gotta love him, but we'll get to that part later. Right.
So Walt's daughter, they name her Holly.
Holly, yep.
It's funny. Some of these names, you hear them and you're like, that doesn't sound like a baby's name. Like you feel like certain names, people are just born when they're like 20 to have a name like that.
Yeah, I mean that's
Holly
a generational thing. Like I don't know any baby named Ashley, but I know a ton of Ashleys, but they were babies once. So
you figure, yeah,
it had to have been, right? Yeah,
probably so.
I think so.
But okay, but do you think that was just a random name, or why did they pick Holly? Like, why did the creators of the show want Walt and Skylar to pick the name Holly?
I can't think of any connection.
Okay.
Yeah, I was thinking of all the different times I've watched it, but yeah, I can't think of a connection.
Well, maybe something will come to us. I thought it a little creepy when Walt takes Holly and he shows her the stash of money that he's got hidden in the insulation in the siding of the house.
I actually love that scene.
Oh yeah. So he says, see what your daddy did for you? That's right. Daddy did that. Who did that? Daddy did that. Okay, so tell us, why did you love that scene?
Yeah, so like it was a combination of baby talk with also the first time he's been able to actually tell someone other than Jesse and Saul about his success. Because if you remember, he had to sit there and just like not be able to take credit for his success. And you see that throughout this whole episode.
During the party to celebrate his cancer being in remission. Right. When Skylar is toasting Elliot and Gretchen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, to the Gretchens. not to Walt, but to the Gretchens, and it just
Elliot,
kills
and
them.
the
Yeah,
Elliots.
and Elliot. It just killed him. And so this was like one weird way for him to finally say, like, this is what I've been able to do. You're not going to tell anyone, and you have no idea what I'm doing. But I feel good in being able to share this with you. And then, yeah, the baby talk was, I understood. Who has done a good baby talk to a baby,
Well, I mean, so I guess to push back a little bit, it's cute on one end, it's understandable on another end, but it's also, it just shows a lot of pride,
Oh, for sure.
right? Like we're seeing the ego kind of like he's just relishing, it's sort of like, remember those DuckTales episodes we used to watch when like Scrooge McDuck would jump into that giant pool of gold coins? It was kind of like, just like, oh, look how wealthy I am. And right. But like you said, it was Walt celebrating his accomplishments and his prowess and his virility, perhaps, in a way that
Sure.
he's not able to do it before. But, and I'm not going to say that that's not deserved. Like, he used his intellect and, he worked really hard and got that. At the same time, it really looks like it's getting to him, like it's getting to his head. And that means he's probably not going to be making good decisions in the future if he's a little bit high on his own accomplishments.
Right.
Okay, so then we go to the scene with Jesse and Walt, and Jesse wants his money and wants to know.
You got to back up a little bit. Jesse was freaking out.
Yes, right.
Because he wakes up and he's like, first off, Jane just said, oh, someone broke in, and just leaves, which is weird because it's, she's the quote unquote landlord and didn't really care that much. But yeah, so Jesse freaks out, calls Walt, as he should have, and said, like, yell at me, scream at me, and was taking responsibility for it. But Walt was just so like, you were that high that you don't even remember, like what happened. And he was just so disappointed. So he just hung up.
Well, didn't he also leave like 3 voice messages?
4. Yeah.
4.
Yeah. And then that's when Jesse comes in. It's like, I heard the voice messages. It was you. And he's like, of course it was me. Like, what was that, heroin? Like.
Yeah. Right. Right. And Walt says, you made me miss the birth of my daughter.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that's true? Do you think that's accurate?
No, not at all.
Why not?
I mean, it's true in the sense of that one situation, but that one situation was only because of all of the choices that they have made together throughout this whole like debacle. They've been doing drugs for over how long, and then like, oh, this one time, that's why you made me choose. It's like, no, you chose to do this, and therefore you can't be upset at some situation that will always arise from you doing this. So
yeah, right, yeah, that's a broader perspective on it. They didn't get to choose when and where the drug deal was going to happen. They were told it's going to be in 1 hour, or you'll never get another chance.
Right.
And I think there's something in that where life, especially when you're playing high stakes like they are, that you get told by reality, this is the way it's going to be. You can either do it or not. You don't get another. There's no third option here. That's how things are. And it's in that sort of crucible of like, you've got one shot, that it's easy, I think, for Walt to say, well, this whole thing could have been easier if Jesse had done X, Y, or Z, right? But my point is this: when they are playing at such high stakes, and when reality says you've only got one shot to do this, then that's a very high stress situation, because anything that goes wrong can ruin the whole thing. And that's the way that they're going to be living if they continue down this path. And that means that they're not going to be able to act well. They're not going to be able to make good choices because nobody makes good choices when they're living at a very high stress level, or when they're living at a very proud level, right? And Walt's kind of in both of these mindsets right now. And
But he was aware, and he makes the comment. I think Walt was ready for this, because he made the comment to Jesse saying we were on call, because he had the conversation with Gus as a last ditch effort to be like, you got to try this. It's the best stuff ever. You'll be able to sell it at this level, blah, 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 blah. And so in a sense, he was ready to be on call. He was expecting, that's all he was thinking about. Jesse obviously was preoccupied with the whole Jane scenario that he didn't really, this became a back burner scenario.
Yeah. No, we never see Walt calling Jesse to say, hey, I just met with Gus and there's a chance that he'll call me and we'll need to do the drug deal really quickly. Maybe that happened,
True.
Maybe not.
True.
But we don't know. So Walt decides he's not going to give Jesse his money. Why?
Well, this was really hard to see, because we haven't seen this side of Walt throughout the entire what we've watched so far. Like, he has not given this dad perspective, teacher perspective type of I am looking out for your best interests. And it makes you wonder. Like, I had to pause it and be like, there's no way he was looking out for Jesse. What was the angle that he was trying to keep from him? It's like, was this bad for business? Was this going to affect him negatively somehow? Like, if he gave him the money? But watching the whole episode, and especially at the end when he decides to come back into the apartment to talk with Jesse, I think he actually was. Like, he had his money. He was proud. What was it, like 400 something thousand that after Saul's cut? I think he was either half of it was looking out for Jesse and the other half was trying to teach him a lesson from his superior type of partner viewpoint.
Yeah. So a couple thoughts. One is, I think it's easy for us to forget just how big of a deal this was for them, because we've seen them make money before. We've seen them do drug deals before, but they've always been one little pound at a time. Mm-hmm. And at great expense. And then there's always been something that has made them lose it. So this is the first time they were doing 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Now they're like 20 steps forward. So that hasn't happened before. And because of how many times they've lost their money, I can understand why Walt would say, we need to be super careful this time and not let any stupid mistakes cost us. Yeah. The second thing is, and you started to hint at this, I think part and parcel with Walt's sort of ego thing, I think he gets a lot out of feeling superior to Jesse. Mm-hmm. We saw that when they were in the desert and he's teaching him this and don't do that. I can't believe you're so stupid you would do this. Every time that happens, Walt feels superior to Jesse. So that might also explain it. But you know what came to my mind in the midst of all of this really strongly was Jesse saying, hey, give me my money. It's my money. I want my money. It made me think of Walt. My bottle. Give me my bottle. I want my bottle. Right? When Hank takes his tequila, when he's clearly either drunk or just not in his right mind and he's ready to harm himself or his son, Hank takes the bottle of tequila from Walt and won't give it to him because he says, I care for you. I care about you too much to let you hurt yourself and hurt your son. Mm. And that wasn't that long ago.
Right.
And now Walt's in the same position.
Yeah, no, I like it. It was almost, if that is the case, and I really like that explanation, then this was almost like a redemption, a second chance per se for Walt to do this on his second son in a way.
Yeah.
You know, I really like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Okay. So the family is still in a bit of a crisis, trying to figure out how they're going to raise the money for Walt's surgery. right? Walt's the only one who knows they've got plenty of money to cover it, but the rest of the family doesn't know. So Walter Jr. makes a website, savewalterwhite.com. And I think this speaks to what we've been saying this whole episode. Why doesn't Walt like it? Why does he kind of lose it? He says that's charity. We don't take I don't want to take charity.
Right.
Then why doesn't he want to take charity? Probably because he's proud.
Right, because it doesn't come from Walter White. Funny thing about that website is still up today. You can go to it, and you read the whole thing that Walter Jr. writes. Can
you give money to it?
Yeah, when you click on the donate button, it just takes you to AMC.com.
That's funny.
It's pretty funny, but yeah, the whole thing's still up there.
But yeah, does it look like a website made in the 90s or something?
Oh yeah, even the writing that Walter Jr. writes, you could tell is just so much from a high schooler. It's good, but like you said, it all comes down to the pride. He doesn't care where it's from, especially not charity, because that's just below, and when he talks to we might be fast forwarding a little bit here, but when he talks about all the scenarios with Saul on how to handle all of that, he doesn't like any of it, except when Saul gives him the idea of it can't be just one big benefactor like Gretchen. It will be just like $50 here, $20 there, and it'll make him feel a little bit better.
Yeah. So something about this, though, it still doesn't really settle in my mind, because it seems that the problem for Walt is, I want credit for this. I'm not going to take somebody else. I want to be the one that figures, I want to have the credit for supplying my family with the money we need for this operation. So when Saul says, yeah, what good is money that doesn't spend? He tells him, you can't spend your money right now because you don't have a plausible explanation for why you have it. And that is going to set off all these alarms, right, with the IRS or wherever, and Saul's thinking about that. So, and so he comes up with these schemes for how they can use the website to launder the money, except that the problem remains for Walt. He doesn't get credit for that. Those are 1,000 different, or however many different little tiny donations from random people, quote unquote, not from him. So why doesn't he seem upset about that? Does he just realize that there's no other option?
Yes. Well, in my opinion, yes. So like he vents out all the frustration he has, and he says, I have plenty of money. This is so frustrating. Like almost like hoping that Saul has an answer. And you could tell from this, like Saul is a very smart guy. Like he's thinking all of the legal ways, all of the illegal ways, but to make them legal. Like he is thinking of every single solution, and he obviously does come up with one that Walt eventually accepts. But you're right. I think at that point, what else is there? Like he's not assuming that he's just going to get whatever the amount, $600,000 or whatever the cost of the surgery is going to be, just from a bunch of random people. But yeah, I think that was the last ditch effort as well. So.
Yeah. Okay. So Jesse is really resentful at Walt, but really resentful. And you see it. He's sort of talking to himself when he's with Jane. Can't believe this guy, he's treating me this way. And it's interesting that when Jesse gets resentful, he turns to drugs as a way to try and find some kind of relief from the pain that is causing. And Jane is right there to teach him how to use heroin. It seems like he's never tried drugs that hard before, right? Like this is the first time he's trying something like heroin. He doesn't really know what he's doing, but she's teaching him and showing him. And we see him now kind of, again, turning the energy from his resentment into this addiction that seems to be beginning here. So, and it's when he's doing that Jane learns of how much money he has coming to him. And then she starts, as you said in the intro, she starts to manipulate him. She sees that Jesse doesn't have the sort of larger vision for what they can do with that kind of money. So the heartbreaking scene then happens when her father comes in and sees Jesse, sees that she's been lying to him, that she's back on drugs, and that she's dating a low life. And his nightmare has happened.
Yeah.
He says something like, the best thing I can do for you now is to turn you over to the cops. That's the best thing. He says it like you could tell it's almost been rehearsed. Like he's been almost waiting for this moment. And he's here. He's like, okay, now I know what I need to do. And he says it, right? And then it's amazing. She actually did a really great job as an actress. But that puppy face, she puts on that puppy face and he just melts. Mm-hmm. She says, Dad, tomorrow, I'll go to rehab tomorrow. And he falls for it. He hangs up the phone with the police and trusts her and believes that that's what's going to happen. I thought that was
brutal to watch. That was tough.
Yeah, it really was. I don't know if this was intentional, but there's a stark contrast between Jesse and Jane in bed high, and then it cuts to Walt and Skylar lying on the bed with their baby. And what is that? Well, there are two couples. One of them is producing death and the other is producing life. Now we know that there's been a lot of deception and all of that wrapped up into Walt and Skylar's relationship as well. But we're reminded that their life is actually productive. It's fruitful. And that when Walt is living the way he normally has been, that's what happens. When Jesse lives the way he normally has been, it leads to this sort of spiral downward into kind of death in various forms. And of course, tragically, that happens at the very end. But I thought that contrast between those scenes was interesting.
Yeah, I didn't even notice that. That's a good call, though.
So here's a question for you. When Jane says, we're going to get this money from this guy, Walter White, she's completely on Jesse's side. She doesn't trust that Walt really does care for Jesse. She thinks that he's just keeping the money for himself. And so when she says, you're going to do what we say, you're going to hand over the money, or we're basically going to tell people that this high school chemistry teacher is a meth lord. Is that blackmail or is that justice?
I think it's more of like, yes, definitely blackmail, but she's hoping that he goes for it. And I kind of think that she doesn't care about why Walt is holding the money. I think ultimately she knows why he's holding the money, just because of the relationship she's had with her dad.
Right.
And she's been clean for 18 months. Like she knows, like she even says before she crosses the line to when Jesse tells her to leave in the prior episodes, she's like, it's not going to solve anything. It's not going to help you. Like, don't do it. But so like, she knows the difference between right and wrong. She's just choosing to do wrong. So I think deep down, she knows that Walt is doing the right thing. But at this point, she does not care. She just wants the money. So she's just trying to think of a strategy to get the money. And obviously it worked to get, Jesse's half. But I really did in a way, Walt kind of got outsmarted by, a junkie, as he likes to say, because even when he brings the money to Jesse's apartment and Jane's there, trying to be like the doorman per se, like he doesn't even look at Jane in the face when Jesse enters the doorway. And he's like, how do I know she won't say anything? And she's like, you don't. And he doesn't even look at her. Like he's looking right at Jesse, and he's serious too at that point.
Right.
So
right. Yeah.
Man.
And that was another one of those foreshadowing
Mm-hmm.
things. If she hadn't said that, maybe Walt would not have felt that he needed to let her die. Anyway, we'll get there. I think what I saw was Jane is kind of unaware of how much of her own agenda is wrapped up in what she thinks is the interest of both Jesse and her. So she, like you said, she knows that people like Walt, like her father, truly do care for them and will withhold from them things that are technically theirs, right? Just like the tequila bottle is technically Walt's, but Hank has a larger vision of what's truly good for Walt and for Walter Jr. and is not going, and so in that scene, Hank renders to Walt what he is truly owed, which is he seeks the good of Walt instead of what is technically his property. And likewise here, I think Jane does recognize that Walt could have Jesse's best interest in mind, but she's already daydreaming about what she and Jesse can do with this money. And it's complicated. There's no real sort of black and white way of looking at it, because on one hand, she's thinking, I know what's best for Jesse, and we're going to get this money, and we're not going to do drugs. Like, we're not going to smoke this money. You know, we're going to go to New Zealand and we're going to live a good, happy life together. And I'm going to get you, Jesse, away from this lifestyle. And so she's, on one hand, she thinks she's seeking his good, but she's doing it contrary to what another person who has known Jesse a lot longer and has some kind of paternal relationship with Jesse, even though he's not really his father, but it's not really clear how much she knows that. But the sort of vague, unclear relationship between, you know, the father figure Walt and the son figure Jesse is in stark contrast again with the relationship between Jane and her father. And we see it just poetically put together when Walt goes to the bar and sits down right next to Jane's father. To me, I saw that and thought, you know, that's kind of far-fetched. But you know what? Crazier things have happened in real life.
Mm-hmm.
That I could actually see that happen.
Yeah. And I love how it started, you know, the guy sitting there right next to Walt as Walt's saying, oh, I've been to 3 stores. They don't have them in that size. Like, can
I'm
I just
here
get
at Walmart now? So yeah.
Yeah. Oh gosh. And he was just like, nice.
Yeah.
You know? Oh.
Right. Yeah. So what happens in that scene though? That
yeah, I mean, they connect over their children, and they tell stories about their children. And Walt says, "What's it like having a girl?" And he says,
well, wait, can I pause for just a second?
Yep.
When you say they connect over their children, they're talking about Jane and Jesse, right? They're not really talking about Holly, right? Like Walt uses that as an excuse, but he's
or Walt Jr. He just substitutes Jesse for Walt Jr. Really.
Right. Yeah, that's right. This scene really brings to the fore that Jesse and Walt are in a kind of son-father position.
Right.
Okay, sorry. Go finish your.
No, I was going to say that Jane's dad was basically giving the advice is you just got to love them because they're going to screw up all the time, and you just got to love them. And, you know, you hear earlier that he's been dealing with this for 10 years. Like, and he goes by that. He practices what he preaches. He just got to love them. It might be hard love, and which he was about to do. That the connection over the shared experience with the children and Jesse, you know, Walt putting Jesse in for Walt Jr. and just learning that. And I forget what his, the Jane's dad says that made Walt kind of think to himself, like, I should go back and talk to Jesse. Maybe it was the love part.
Yeah. There's a line now, I can't remember which one of them says it, maybe it's Jane's dad. I think it is actually. He says, daughters, they are who they are. And I want to like, well, wait a minute now. They also are who they choose to be or who they choose to become. And that's kind of the whole point of the show, right? Is that Walt has made these choices to become the person that he is. And likewise, Jane, and likewise, Jesse. And they've all been making choices, shaping who they end up becoming. And so that kind of complicates the advice that Jane's dad gives when he says, you've just got to love them. Like you said, sometimes that's hard love, but it all depends upon what in this moment is truly good for that person. How do I know?
Right. Well, he also says something to family, you can't give up on them, never. And that was after the love part. So him not giving up on them was ultimately, it shows that even though that he wanted to call the cops and he felt like in the moment he did get schmoozed, he wasn't able to do the hard love as much as he's wanted to. I mean, 10 years and he hasn't probably called the cops before. Maybe he has. You don't really know what the relationship was like before then, but
yeah. Well, and then it just gets worse when let's bear in mind, because of what Jane's dad said, Walt goes back to try to talk to Jesse. Now I'm thinking, okay, you might think that's a good idea. I mean, I'm also thinking, okay, you also have duties to your family, your actual family. Your wife is expecting you back a long time ago with diapers. And Cabes, you and I know what it would be like if you didn't have diapers. I mean, you don't want to be in that situation.
No, you don't want to be that.
You don't want to be there, right? And so on one hand, you could say, well, he could have said, okay, I'm going to wait till the next day and I'm going to go and talk to Jesse when things cool down, but I'm going to fulfill the duties that I have to my family first. But he doesn't do that. Okay, well, maybe he felt like it was really necessary that they talk right away. And, we know that they were secretly planning to leave to go to New Zealand. So maybe that was a good idea. But then he gets there and he sees that he's not just asleep, but he's high as a kite.
Mm-hmm.
And Walt still thinks, no, I can wake him up and we can have a lucid conversation. I'm thinking, this is crazy. And then when he shakes him and Jane rolls over, now we should mention another one of those foreshadowing things is when they do heroin the first time, Jane says, oh, you got to make sure you're on your side. Because if you fall on your back, you could throw up and drown on your own vomit. So
but you also see a second time.
Yeah.
Walt does that to Holly and he actually rolls up and he's next to Marie. He says, oh, this way she won't spit up. Yes, so you see it foreshadowed twice.
I forgot about that. Yeah, right. Good point. So we, the audience, are reminded a lot that that's a possibility, but we're not expecting it to happen, of course. But I still think it's just really odd that Walt is there to begin with and that he thinks, yeah, let me wake Jesse up from this drug-induced slumber and let's have a conversation. I don't know why he thinks that's possible. Because remember when he tried to wake him up, when he tried to find out where the meth was?
Right.
I mean, like, what is he thinking is going to happen?
The only thing I could think of is when he left the first time after dropping off the money, Jesse's last words were, "You'll never see or hear from us again." And so there might have been some urgency that if he did not talk to him tonight, this might be it.
Yeah, that might be the best explanation.
No, the next scene was very brutal. In Walt, knee-jerk reaction, oh, let me go help, as she's starting to throw up.
Well, so I thought actually he doesn't immediately think, oh, let me help her. His first thought is confusion and what's going on. And I don't know what to do. And somebody do something.
Right.
I mean, he doesn't say anything. So we're just having to kind of guess what he's thinking. But he looks confused and panicky at first. He's not thinking, oh, this is great. She'll probably die. and she's the one who threatened to blackmail me and said I'll never know for sure if she'll keep her mouth shut. So it's good that that takes a lot of thinking, and he doesn't put all of that together right away.
Right. Well, it was shock, and then, oh my gosh, let me help, and then like it was like in a steps.
Yeah.
And by running to the other side of the bed to help her, that's when he stops, right when his hands go up, and at that point it was just like, you could tell it was just like a battle in his head, like what to do and what not to do, and he just could not commit to doing it because he wasn't able to decide. And then you see her eyes open, and at that point he knows he's just, it's too late. And you see he put his hands over his mouth and he starts weeping himself. And man, that was hard. You know, there's a book that Bryan Cranston wrote, and he talks about his acting career. And he said that to date, that doing that scene was the hardest scene he's ever done in any film at all. Because when he got into that into character, he imagined it was his own daughter, and to be kind of like in the moment. And he said after they said cut, he just broke down crying, like he was that involved in the scene. And I get it. I mean, that was a really rough scene to watch. He's right there, and he's literally choosing not to save her, and just
Well, this might be a little far-fetched, but in a way not, right? So if Jesse is, in a way, his son,
sure,
and Jane's potentially kind of like his daughter-in-law, you know, if they were to be married or something like that. So there is a connection there. You know, I tried to think, like, what are all the things going through his head in that moment? I mean, things like, this girl has warped Jesse, and you know, we know that he kind of disdains the way that she controls Jesse when he comes in when he meets him the first time and gives him the money. He says something like, "Nice job wearing the pants." Right? Like, he knows that Jane's basically, her personality is kind of controlling Jesse. So he could be thinking, this is my way to get Jesse back. He could be thinking, this is a fellow druggie who, ever since she entered the scene, Jesse has gotten worse. You know, he went from basically smoking marijuana and doing meth every now and then to doing heroin. But he's also thinking of himself. He's got to be thinking, she threatened to reveal my identity, and she made it known that I could never sleep well at night knowing that she knew that. So it's his ticket out.
Yeah, this solves everything. What do I do?
Right. But also, every choice that they've made since the very beginning has led to this point where that, in a way, her death had to happen because of all the things they've done. He couldn't afford to let her living ruin their 20 steps ahead that they've finally gotten. And in a way, this is how this is different. This part in the whole story is different because every other time they've gone forward and come back. Now, the only way that they could continue to go forward if Walt commits this act of negligence that is manslaughter. Oh, you got anything else?
That was the end of the scene, right? The end of the episode right then when it happened. Yeah.
Yeah.
So next episode is the finale.
The finale of season 2.
Of season 2 will be told. Yeah. Gonna be good. Well, thank you everyone for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, share, subscribe. You could find us on Apple, YouTube, and Patreon. And we will see you next time as we break into another episode of Breaking Bad.